Most mental illnesses could be translated into the words, I'm scared. Don't you think? Narcissism, psychopathy, sociopathy, bipolar, PTSD, anxiety disorder, and so many more are all just various ways of people trying to cope with an intense fear of being hurt. Some mental health disorders, like psychosis or schizophrenia, might not have fear as their root cause, but fear is still the main thing that makes those conditions so painful for people. In fact, some people say that the main difference between a schizophrenic and the mystic sage on the mountaintop is just that the schizophrenic is feeling afraid, whereas the sage is feeling peace. Fear is either the root cause or the number one problem with nearly all mental health disorders. But most of the time, we totally forget that, don't we? When we hear that someone is a narcissist, we don't usually think, how sad. They must be so afraid that they're unlovable. Or when we hear that someone is a psychopath, we don't think, oh man, they must be so afraid of losing control of the people around them and that they might get hurt again. So fear is the root cause of so many mental health problems. And guys, the very same thing is true about relationship problems between romantic partners. What problem would exist and persist between two people who genuinely love each other? What problem wouldn't easily be solved by them if not for intense fear in one or both people? Can you think of a single relationship problem? I can't. Fear is the number one problem in relationships, and yet out of the tens of thousands of books written on the topic, how many of them put fear on the table and make it one of the main issues to be addressed? Why do we keep forgetting that fear is the problem when it's so obvious if you actually think about it and look at it? Why don't we recognize that human beings do really strange things and sometimes really bad things to other people and to themselves just because they're deeply scared? We don't recognize this because we're like cats, aren't we? When a strange dog approaches a cat on the street, there's the possibility of real danger for the cat. And yet, the cat won't run away in fright, hissing and howling. What it usually does is acts totally nonchalant. It might even start licking its paw and grooming itself before getting up and slowly walking away, maybe stopping and sitting down to groom again for a moment. All of this is just an act for the dog. It's putting on a show to send a message to the dog of complete fearlessness and confidence. In the same way, we all hide our fear from each other and from ourselves as if we're Oscar-winning cats. And that's the real problem. The problem isn't that we have fear so much, is that we feel a need to hide it from others and from ourselves. That's when the mental health disorders start and the relationship difficulties begin. And it's why those things can be so hard to solve. We hide our fear partly because there's a primitive survival instinct telling us to do so. And sometimes that instinct is genuinely helpful. Self-defense coaches always tell their students the number one thing to do if you're walking through a dangerous part of town at night is to control your body language so you project strength and fearlessness. In other words, hide your fear. The worst thing you can do walking through a dangerous part of town at night is to look scared, because then you're signaling to other people that you're defenseless, and it actually invites them to do something bad to you because you look like an easy target. Another reason we hide our fear is that a lot of us were shamed for having it by family members and by kids at school. It's almost like these people were intent on making us hide our fear. There seems to be an unconscious program running in human societies to get people to do that, to get people to stop feeling their fear and to hide it. And that's probably because there's a genuine survival value in hiding our fear. But the tragedy for so many of us is that we've been taught to hide our fear so well, and we've been hiding it for so long, and we feel so afraid and ashamed of revealing our fear that we don't know how to stop hiding it, even with the people that we love, even with close friends and family, and even with our chosen life partner who we've committed to loving and supporting for the rest of our lives and who've committed to loving and supporting us. Even from them, we tend to hide our fear. And when we do that, intimacy just it takes a huge hit in our relationships. How can there be intimacy when we're afraid to show our partner who we really are and what we're really feeling? How can there be intimacy when we're literally hiding ourselves from them? Answer, there really can't be a complete and healthy intimacy. And when nearly all relationship problems come from this fact that we're hiding our fear from others and from ourselves, then there's no way to fix those problems. There's no way to fix something that we refuse to look at or admit to. So instead of fixing the problems, we put all of our energy into our coping strategy. And in doing that, we abandon those frightened parts of our own psyche. And then nothing gets better. Things just start to fall apart, including our relationships. They start to fall apart sooner or later because that genuine connection, the thing that makes us feel loved, safe, and supported, is damaged or non-existent. Instead of admitting that we're scared, some of us will clutch our partner too tightly, and we call that anxious attachment. And some of us, instead of admitting that we're scared because we learned to cope with our fear by turning off our emotions, we do that. But then we become cold and distant to our partner. We call that avoidant attachment. And of course, everyone tends to blame our partner for the fear that's coming up in us that we refuse to really face and acknowledge and own. And so we try to change them instead of fixing the problem at its source. These are all different ways of not telling our partner something very, very simple. Hey, I'm scared. I'm feeling scared about XYZ. Instead of saying that simple sentence, we communicate with an unconscious message. I think I'll develop an unhealthy coping mechanism as a way to manage my fear that will damage our relationship. But doing it that way ends up making us and them even more unhappy and often even more afraid. So the first step to solving our biggest problems in relationships and in our lives is to start to acknowledge this obvious truth that we've all learned to shut down and stop seeing and feeling, that we're afraid. We have to start welcoming our fears with kindness. And if we're in an intimate relationship, we have to start daring ourselves to share our fears with our partner. That's the only way to start fixing this problem. And yes, this can be really hard to do because we feel deeply ashamed and deeply afraid of our own fear. And not only that, but our fears can feel really terrible. They can feel really overwhelming when they rise up in us. It can feel like something really bad is happening, even if it's not. It can also distort what is happening and make it look dangerous and scary, even when it's totally benign. So it is really helpful to create strong containers in order to start facing our fears. But we also have to remember that no container is going to feel safe when we're feeling our fear. If it felt safe, then our fear wouldn't be rising up in the first place. In order to overcome our fears, we have to be willing to feel our fear and admit to it, even when it doesn't feel safe. Because it won't. Fear doesn't feel safe by its very nature. We do need that strong container of love and awareness and good communication, but then we have to be willing to go for it. At the end of the day, there is no other way to get back home to safety, love, and connection with ourselves and other people without going through that dark, scary part of the forest path. And as always, I will say that everything I'm saying to you is exactly what I need to hear myself, just like every other video I make. Cheers.